Hey, welcome to Top Shelf Tech, and thanks for joining us on our Disruptive Tech series. Today we are talking to Craig Cummin from Transmit Transmit Security. Craig is the Global VP of Customer Solutions and System Engineering. Welcome along, Craig.
Thanks so much. Really happy to be here.
So, man, great to be able to do these things globally, despite not being able to travel. So I'm in New Zealand, Craig's sitting in New York right now. And I guess Transmit Security for me is an interesting one because I had never heard of Transmit Security until about 3 months ago. And then my LinkedIn feed blew up with this news of a company doing $543 million US on their Series A round, which is the largest Series A funding round in history, I believe, for a cybersecurity company. Craig, tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're super proud of it and excited about it as well. So Transmit's been around for about 7.5 years or so. And really our goal as a company was to bring together two different domains. So, looking at identity and access management and looking at user experience. And usually there was always this, fine line you had to straddle. It wasn't even a fine line. It was a thick line between giving the user something that made them feel good and was easy versus, how do you actually authenticate and authorize them? And so the company's mandate and kind of goal from day one is to bring those together, identity and access management, user experience, into identity experience. And the ultimate goal was, even if you look at some of our early slides, they'll say it was a password replacement toolkit. We knew identity had to change. We knew all the problems with passwords. We knew what people were doing. And unfortunately, back when the company started, there were only so many options that you had to layer things over and over. So we started out in the market space with the same vision and same goal, and we built a very successful business. We were privately funded up until, as you mentioned, I guess this June, by the two founders, Rakesh Lunkar and Mickey Boudet. And we were cash flow positive actually after year number 2. So highly successful. People needed to move to a new way to do identity. They recognized this. And as time went on and we kind of evolved the technology, continuing to execute on that vision, this goal of passwordless, of creating this new paradigm of identity and getting closer to who the end user actually is, started becoming so much more powerful. And it was all led by giving a great user experience while at the same time giving a better picture of who that user is, preventing things like account takeover, all the things that you should be looking at when doing identity. And so, back in June, we built a very successful portfolio of customers up till that point. All validating the technology, which allowed us to go out and led by some of the most prominent VCs out there. We got close to actually over $500 million in a Series A. So not that we needed the money for operation, but obviously there's many reasons why you would take a round. But that was behind it. It was truly established technology, a truly established vision. And everybody seems to agree that it makes sense.
And I think for us, we've gone, wow, this is new because we've just kind of heard about it through the cap raise. But as you said, 7 years operating, and you've got some pretty big customers sitting behind you as well, from what I understand.
We do. We have a lot of large financial customers. But it really spans the gamut in the way that we've developed identity now. Identity is a problem that we've seen proliferate across, all verticals. So financial, we definitely have a stronghold there. Why? Because their kind of balancing act or their challenges with identity are so complex, and they're trying to solve these things, and they're very slow to evolve and move, right? So creating a technology that allows them to leapfrog and do it faster and really get to where they need to be is super powerful. But between the financial space, healthcare, retail has been actually really big for us, and even gotten bigger since COVID hit, right? As things are becoming more and more digitized, more is going online. And what we're finding is even retail verticals, they're looking to understand more about who their users are. In other words, not allowing things like guest checkout. They want to understand more. So really, we've been able to build the stronghold, I think, across all these verticals really, really well.
I think identity in its own right is digital identity. It's been quite challenging to solve, and one of the ways it was explained to me that's always stuck with me is on a human to human level. When somebody stands in front of you, you kind of got all these checks and balances you're doing, and sort of a background processing. Does this person look the way I'd expect them to look, given what I know about them? Do they sound the way I expect them to look? And all these sort of intrinsic things we do as humans, and to replicate that in the digital world, where you could, you really don't have a lot of that natural identity stuff happening. You end up adding a lot of complexity. And I think the really interesting thing here is you're talking about removing complexity, and in fact, a huge amount of what you're trying to solve is around user experience, positive experience, getting good uptake of identity. And I think to your point, instead of people just using guest checkouts and taking the easy path, that they'll actually engage and use a digital identity.
That's right. That's right. And to your point, if you think about it this way, and I always talk to people about the difference between authentication and identity. What is the difference, right? And the act of authenticating is very simply I'm presenting some kind of an identifier and some kind of a secret that's matching, right? That doesn't tell me who Craig is as a user. And really, in looking at this new way of doing identity and looking at what's available to us, at the same time, keeping that balancing act, what's easy to me as a user? What do I do on my iPhone 100 times a day? I unlock it. How? I use a biometric, right? What else can I do around that? What are things we can take advantage of? I almost see it as, you're looking at a picture starting to form and you see little pixels starting to come in, right? The same way you're saying when someone's standing in front of you, you're assessing, oh, it's about the right height, it's about the right hair color, so on and so forth. If you just have one piece of information, or maybe two, because you have a step up for authentication, it really tells you nothing. But if you're able to start gathering data and you're able to start doing it in a very, very frictionless way for the end user, and you're able to understand patterns and behaviors. When I say behavior, it's a broad term. I don't mean telemetry, although those are solutions that are out there. I mean, Craig's coming in the mobile app, now he's coming in the web app, now he's coming in the call center. What can I glean about him or the devices he's using or combinations thereof in building that picture, in grabbing those pixels? How can I start getting closer to who that user really is, right? And that's what really the company is focused around, is enabling people to do that. Even with the proliferation of new technologies that are out there and new devices now, biometrics are on everything, right? And that's great. That's one element. But there's a bunch of different capabilities that we need to put together in order to achieve what I just talked about. And that is the hard part. That's very hard for people to do. And the success we've had is that we've been able to do that as a service and make it super easy to consume.
Hey, Craig, we talk about biometrics on iPhones, and people have been comfortable with that for a long time because I think, it's something you've got there, you slip it in your pocket, it feels like you still have a sense of ownership of that. Should people be concerned about biometrics being used more broadly from an identity perspective?
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question. From a what?
Should people be more concerned about biometrics being used more broadly outside their sort of iPhone from an identity perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What I will say is that, what these devices have done really well, and, it's not just the iPhone, of course, it's the Androids as well, the, Windows machines with the TPM chips and the Macs, they have dedicated secure hardware and subsystems. And so the beauty there is that the biometric and how it's being translated into, some kind of a mathematical representation, it never leaves the device. It's stored incredibly securely, right? Now, you can utilize that in the context of identity in the right way. You can use it in the wrong way. But in generally speaking, using biometrics, you want to make sure that they are they're not flying over the air. They're not stored centrally, right? When you look at starting to do all of those types of things, things can get a little bit more complicated. Things can, start to scratch your head and say, well, wait a minute, is that really secure? Where's it being stored? How's it being stored? How's it going over the wire? Who has access to that, right? And so the beauty is that natively these devices do it all for us, right? And we know that they're on our person. We know that that information is never leaving the device. And so think of it as a key that's being used. It actually is used. It is being used to release or to access a key that's stored securely, to prove that, that the biometric was a match, and that whatever process is invoking it is now authorized, right? So this is the right way to look at it. Why not use something that you have in your possession? Why not use something now that is a commodity and it's out there for everyone, and it's the most secure approach?
Awesome. If you're talking to a customer and the customer's saying, look, Craig, how do I justify purchasing Transmit? What is the value proposition? We've kind of mentioned a number of things around user experience, around being able to connect to customer journey better, improving security, getting rid of passwords. What does it kind of show up with when somebody's trying to go write a business case? What do they put down to say this is why we should use Transmit?
Yeah, and if you ever listen to one of our sales presentations, you'll see it's all about this, right? It's talking about the way we deliver identity as a business enabler, right? At the end of the day, the security is great, the ATO is great, but it has to mean something to the business at the end of the day. So, when you look at the whole customer experience piece, and, I'll just talk about 3 areas really quickly. The first is being revenue loss. So when you look at the terrible experience with passwords, when people come in to do a checkout experience and they have to do things like, okay, we recognize your email, please log in to proceed further to checkout. All right, hey, I've forgotten my password. I don't know what it is. I've got to go through an OTP. I've got to call in. You know what? I'm abandoning my shopping cart. I don't care. I'll go get this someplace else where I can get it. A great example of that, we have a very, very large, it's a home improvement type organization here in the US. And when COVID started, they used to actually allow guest checkout, and they were missing a lot. It cost them almost $70 per user to get information about that user so they can market to them and do various types of things to better understand the business. And so they took away guest checkout, and they enabled, or they required login. And the amount of money they lost by shopping cart abandonment was huge, right? Now, tied into that piece is higher support volumes. So, hey, I've forgotten the credentials I have. I'm calling into the support center, okay? What does that mean for me? Those calls cost a lot of money. Horrible user experience, awful. I hate them. You go through the VRUs or the IVRs, and it's a complete nightmare. And then tied directly into that are security breaches, right? How many passwords are harvested every day? How many attacks are attributed to password leaks, password breaches? And how big of a vector is calling into the call center, because you've got a human on the other end, right? Impersonating Craig and saying, yeah, it's really Craig. I've got this information. I know his favorite pizza topping or his dog's name. Let me reset his password, right? So those are direct business outcomes. Now, things that we've actually measured and that are important to people out there are initial login, right? The abandonment rate for initial logins, for sure. The interdiction, so the amount of step-ups that you have to do. Why do we do step-ups? Because you let them in with a low degree of assurance, right? It's like building a house, and the brick you laid first has a crack in it. So you're laying another brick on top, which also has a crack, by the way, because OTPs can be stolen, and you've got CAPTCHAs that can be forged and all this kind of stuff, right? So a false sense of security, plus you're creating a bad user experience. Resets. What happens when the user gets a new device and enrolls again? So all of these things we've shown and we've studied have a direct business impact. And when you bring those use cases back, we see a direct correlation between user experience and the business.
Awesome. Great answer, Craig. And you've got $500 million burning a hole in your pocket now. Where to from here for Transmit?
Yeah, we've got some really, really exciting stuff happening. So, in this broader concept of identity, what else should we be looking at? There's lots of places where we can go, and it's all predicated upon, first and foremost, doing away with passwords. Now, a lot of people hear this term passwordless, and the way other companies are using it is making less use of passwords. With our model, it's eradicating them completely from the user experience, never even from the initial login. I'm sure you've seen your apps. Hey, I log in with a username and password. Oh, do you want to enable Face ID? Sure, boom. But if I lose the app or have to download it again, I have to rebind again. Guess what? I'm logging in with password, right? Those are all weaknesses. So we've built this foundation that, by the way, is not easy to do. It's not predicated upon a traditional user directory, which requires password. So we've laid the foundation down for that. The other thing you may have heard is the FIDO standard. For those of you that don't know it, it's widely accepted out there now. It's actually FIDO 2, which uses an interface called WebAuthn, and it's great because all the operating systems support it, so do the browsers, and it allows you to go and actually use a secure mechanism, a PKI framework instead of passwords. The problem is that it's very hard to implement. It's very costly to implement. So we've created a solution that fills the gaps for all of that, and we're going to continue to expand on that. So for example, think about it, right? I'm able to authenticate, but I'm also able to fill those gaps that FIDO had, which is what happens if I come in from an incognito browser? What happens if I come in from a different device? Can I build a portfolio of devices and authenticators where I can still, as a service, give the service or the relying party an indication that, yes, this is in fact Jeremy. He's just using a different device, right? So more along the lines of this, more along the lines of blurring between what we used to think of very distinctly as identity and then trust or risk, right? Imagine merging these two things to really create what we're talking about as a new vision for identity, not predicated on passwords, and doing so much more with getting closer to the end user. Now, this also involves other things, right? So, for example, the question might come to mind of, well, how do you link the user initially, right? IDV processes, KYC processes, maybe scanning of a government issued ID. All of these things become tools, and they're just services, right? Blended together properly in that identity model. This is where we want to continue to grow the company and the product.
Awesome. Hey, Craig, sounds like you and Transmit have a very exciting journey ahead of you. Just want to thank you for taking the time to join us today and talk to us a little bit about where you guys have come from and where you're heading to. So thanks a lot for joining us, and great to hear what you guys are up to.
My pleasure. Again, thank you so much for the invite. It was a real pleasure to meet you and to have this opportunity. And yeah, we're excited to get out there and talk to more people about Transmit.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Craig. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Feel free to comment in the social media streams if you want any questions answered. I'm sure ourselves and the team from Transmit will have a look at that and jump in and be able to answer any questions you might have. So thank you all for joining us on Top Shelf Tech today.